religious realm, right? And so science being outside of the religious realm, we talk about ethics. But they're related. There's definitely relationships between morals and ethics, right? And so if you were that customer walking in and the boss said, I don't like how they look, I just charge them more, see if they'll pay it, because I know they're rich, right? And you say no, you have some type of moral code, ethical code that's telling you this is wrong, right? Now, at the end of the day, that's a pretty minor one, right? I mean, yes, it's wrong, but there's different grades of wrong, right? There's seriously wrong, there's kind of wrong, but wrong is wrong, I get that too. But there's different grades. But in sciences, as Audrey was talking about, it's not just that isolated, right? Imagine that you're not a scientist. Imagine you're an engineer, because this is an easier thing for people to understand. And you're the engineer that helped design and build a bridge, and you know that something is not structurally sound with that structure. And your boss says, I've done that 1,000 times. I don't care what the calculations say. We're going to build it that way. Is it okay to just say the boss told me to? Right? Why not? I mean, people are going to die. We know that, right? We know that bridge will fall. We've seen these types of things happen in the news. And so, what is an ethical chemist is definitely an important thing for us to read and understand, not just from the viewpoint of our discipline or our chosen profession, but for us, it is part of being, part of the human race, humanity, right? I would not want somebody, when I get on the next airplane that I'm going to get on, going, well, my boss said that engine looked okay. I want them to function with a certain level of ethics. What did you take from this particular reading before we get into details? What did you take from it? What are some components of being an ethical chemist? What does it mean to be ethical?
Have good morals.
Pardon?
Have good morals.
Good morals? Okay. Do you have to have morals to be ethical? No. You do not. What were you going to say?
I said to do what is right.
To do what is right. Right? Morals and ethics go kind of hand in hand. That's true. But I know a lot of people that would claim that they don't hold much in terms of a moral code, but are very ethical people. Again, that connotation that morals has with a religious belief a lot of times, right? And so there's people that just aren't that way. Yeah.
How would you say that morals and ethics are different? I've always kind of considered them to be synonymous with each other.
They are not synonymous.
Okay, so how would you say that they're different?
Ethics is usually rooted in a profession from a group of individuals that come together to agree upon what a set of ethical standards might be for that profession. Ethics for chemists can be different than ethics for lawyers. There's different ethical standards, right? Whereas morals, most people in my mind, and again, I'm not an expert in this, but in my mind, when I took my philosophy class, morals were more of a universal thing, usually had a religious context to it. You typically, for those of you who go to church or the synagogue or temple, whatever, you probably learn a set of moral values for your faith. But ethics are where professionals get together and decide on what an ethical code might be within the profession. A lot of overlap, I'll give you that, but they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing at all. So, if you look on page 40 of the page 3 of this, really for us, but it's listed as 40 in the journal. There was this quest for understanding, this fundamental understanding, right? And so science, that's what we're all about. It's trying to understand the world and the way that it works. And so there's this quadrant, right? And on the y-axis it says quest for fundamental understanding. On the x-axis, which is up there at the top, it's consideration of use. Science deals with both axes, right? There is science that we are just curious about how the world is working, and let's study that. Let's study how that cell in biochemistry was working. Let's study how that cell is communicating with another cell. Then there is science and using the scientific method towards some human use, some end, right? So, hey, this cell is communicating with that cell, and when it does so, it becomes cancerous. I want to build an anti-cancer agent, right? That's more than just fundamental understanding. It's about, hey, there's a disease associated with this, how can I cure it, right? So we have these types of things, and it creates a quadrant. So if your fundamental understanding, you're just doing it for purely fundamental understanding, you're not considering the use, this would be like pure fundamental research. This would be like what Niels Bohr did, okay? You're trying to understand how the world is made up. You don't know what it's useful for, right? When they first started doing quantum mechanics, everybody knows what quantum mechanics kind of is, right? It's a fundamental part of chemistry. It's a fundamental part of physics these days. They could care less at that time, back in the 1920s when they were doing all this stuff, and even before, when they were figuring out how the world worked. They had no idea that it would one day lead to global positioning satellites, your cell phone, right? Who knew that global positioning satellites depended on quantum mechanics? It does. You have to use these things called atomic clocks to measure time accurately enough to pinpoint a car's position to within a few inches. If we didn't have an understanding, fundamental understanding of quantum mechanics, it wouldn't work, right? So, just because you're interested in it from a pure fundamental point doesn't mean that it can't have uses at some point, right? You can have a quest for fundamental understanding and a consideration of its use. That was Louis Pasteur. Interested in germ theory because people were sick, dying, right? But you needed to have that fundamental understanding. And then you have good old Thomas Edison. Pure applied research, right? How many iterations of the light bulb did he have? Anybody know? 1 or 2?
10,000.
It was a lot of thousands. Yeah, it was many, many. He didn't care to understand why the light bulb didn't work that he built. He just was going to build a different one to see if it worked. And so he used a very, we're going to shove it through process. He had like 10,000 ways to not make a battery, right? That was how Edison did this. Are there any ethical differences between pure research and applied research? What would you say are differences in the ethics?
I feel as though like you can research something just for the sake of research and really know you're gonna apply it to a group of people or like an environment or something like that. You have to take into account the people that it affects.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so if I know that it's going to be applied in some human context, there's another dimension to my responsibility, isn't there? I'll agree with that. I can research something just for the heck of it, and as long as it stays isolated, it's just knowledge, right? What happens to that knowledge is when we apply it to the, okay, I like that, that's good. Right. Can anybody think of any other uses or any other things where people are let's just say, quest for fundamental knowledge but aren't thinking about its use? Anybody think of anything that's in the news maybe? Have you ever heard of any piece of research where like, why would they even want to know that? Any examples? I don't have too many off the top of my head. Most of the times when we're watching the news, You know, you're watching the SpaceX rocket, you know why they're doing that, they wanna launch Starlink satellites, or they wanna put a global positioning satellite in space, or, you know, when you hear something in medical research, they're trying to cure some kind of disease. Most of what we hear in the common media definitely always has a consideration of use. That usually catches human interest. I would argue most of you are thinking about going on and doing something that may have a potential use, right? Many of you are thinking about medical school, dental school, graduate school, whatever the case may be. I doubt many of you are thinking about, I wonder what the next quantum theory should be, and I have no idea what it's useful for. Some of you might, but most people tend to be use-driven individuals. I hope that you're more of a yes, yes, as opposed to an Edison no, yes. Because I think it's kind of a waste of time to just do things without trying to have some type of understanding about what's going on. So, in his talk, he lists 8 things that he's come up with, these problems that are challenging. He's identified 8 factors that lead to some ethical considerations, right? There are complex situations. Rarely are moral problems straightforward. Just understanding the facts can be difficult, right? Every one of us will be faced with those types of things, right? You will be faced with an ethical dilemma, and it will be, if I do this, then this is the consequence. If I do that, that's the consequence. You'll have these types of things. So it's not always straightforward. Each of us are a citizen, or is a citizen of a national society with a history, goals, ideals. Citizenship comes with obligations, right? We've all got these types of things that are working on us in our ethics. We all have institutional obligations that come from our employer or our school, right? You have obligations while you're here. What are your obligations as a student? To learn. What else? Is that the only obligation you have? Pay tuition? Okay. Be honest and not steal other people's work. Plagiarize. Don't do that. That kind of stuff. What else?
Meet other people.
Meet other people. Do we have a code of student conduct?
Yes.
We do. Is that an ethical document? Yeah, kind of is. Can anybody recite anything from the code of student conduct?
All I know is like the word respect to other people.
Respect. Yeah, respecting different people, different viewpoints. In today's environment, that's getting harder and harder to do. Or at least some people would have us believe that, right? If you watch the news, you would think that everybody was disrespectful of everybody, and it's either you're an R or a D or this, that, or the other, right? That there's nothing in common between us. We're in 2 camps. So, what else in the student code or student handbook might stick out to you?
I think it was integrity.
Integrity? What does it mean, integrity?
Being responsible for your
Being responsible for your actions, taking responsibility, right? If you get caught cheating and taking responsibility, that's integrity, even though you've broken a moral student code of conduct, right? It's not always easy though, right? Just because you may break one thing doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person, right? As scientists, we belong to professional organizations. Can anybody tell me what the professional organization is for chemists, the biggest one?
ACS.
The ACS, which stands for the American Chemical Society. There is a code of conduct. When I'm getting ready to go to an ACS meeting in October in Atlanta, and I registered, and I got my hotel room, and at the end it said, I had to check mark and verify that I have read and understood my obligations and that I will follow the ACS code of conduct while I'm at the meeting. I will show everybody at that meeting respect, consideration, and there's some other things that they talk about, right? I'm not going to create a hostile environment, right? So our Professional organizations say that. So ACS is the big one for chemists. Does anybody know of any others?
Is ACS bigger than IUPAC?
ACS is considered, ACS would be bigger than IUPAC, I believe. The International Union of Pure and Applied Chemists, I don't think has as many members as ACS. But IUPAC is pretty good size. No doubt about it. They have a lot of
So
functions.
ACS is only for American chemists or? for-
No, it isn't the American Chemical Society. It was chartered by the federal government. It's the oldest chartered scientific organization in America, but it is really an international body now. There are just as many, or I would say there are more international members of ACS than whatever domestic means today. And so every time I go to an ACS meeting, you'll find people from China, Korea, Germany, the European countries, all coming, Mexico, coming to the meeting to do whatever they came to do. And so there's a lot of international folks involved in that these days. Let's see. We're all members, as we know, of a human community. We all have obligations to funding agencies. Anybody in here have an obligation to a funding agency? I do. Do you have one?
I mean, scholarship.
Scholarships, yeah, that's a good point. Do they come with any obligations?
Yeah,
Okay, what kind of obligations they come with?
15 credit hour per semester, 2.5 GPA.
You've got it down, all right. For some of you, you may have an athletic scholarship, right? You've got obligations too. You gotta go to your game. You gotta practice. You gotta do all kinds of things. You can't just take the money and then go, thanks. I'm not gonna do these things, right? I have obligations to a funding agency because I have a grant. And that grant requires me to do certain things and have certain ethics and moral responsibilities. Of course, religious beliefs can come into play. There's also self-interest. For many of you, it's very easy to discount that at this point, but there will come a time in your life when you'll be faced with an ethical dilemma, and on one hand, if you choose to do the wrong thing, you will be rewarded monetarily, and if you don't, you will not. That is a tough choice to make. People like to make a good living, right? So these things come into play. Self-interest is not out of the realm of this. So, in his talk, he also talked about 4 major areas of ethics, or situations where ethics come up. One of them is choosing a research project. How could choosing a research project create ethical situations that I would have to take into consideration? Can't I just research anything I want? Sure, I could, right? I could. There's nothing that forbids me from researching anything I want. But if I started researching tomorrow on sociology, would that be responsible for me? Why not?
Yeah, sociology.
I'm not a sociologist. I don't know the first thing other than the high school class I took that was called psychology and sociology. It's the only time I ever had a psych and social class, was in high school. For me to start getting involved in reporting and publishing on sociology research would be irresponsible, right? But now, if I decided to branch out in my area of chemistry, well, I got a PhD in chemistry. I'm trying to learn something new. I can do that through my research. The gap in my knowledge is certainly more narrow there, right? I have certain expertise that I can apply to this field. I have no tools or techniques to apply in the sociological realm, right? Does that mean that I can't challenge sociology? Of course I can challenge. Anybody can challenge a result. You can always say, that just doesn't seem to jive with what I know, right? And then they can show their data and they can do whatever they want. But choosing a research project can create ethical dilemmas. And I'll give you a perfect example. I don't know if any of you were born at this time. Anybody remember the Deepwater Horizon oil spill? Okay, a few of you. Okay. Money flowed like there was no tomorrow when that happened, because BP wanted to get off everybody's naughty list. So we're giving all this money out. And I had somebody call me and say, we got a bunch of money if you will join our research team to do X. And I said no. Why did I say no?
It was black money.
No, I would have taken the money,
Oh,
but I did not have the expertise to do it. It would have been wrong. I could have taken the money, I could have said I could do it, but I really couldn't do it. I did not know the first thing about the area of analysis that they needed to do. Could I have learned it? Yes. Could I have done it within the time frame that I was asked to do it? No. So I said, I'm not your person. How many people do you think would have just said yes and taken the money? Maybe a few. I actually hope not many. I hope the people that did say yes had the expertise to do the work. The person who was calling didn't commit any sin, right? I mean, they were looking for people. I'm an organic chemist. Organic chemistry has its roots in petroleum. But I did not have that set of techniques to do the work that they needed to do. Discarding a data point. You all will face this all of the time. Where might we be tempted to discard a data point or two?
When they're extreme.
When they're extreme, okay? Does that mean, though, that extreme behavior in those data points is inaccurate or wrong?
It can be outlier.
Pardon?
It could be an outlier.
Could be an outlier.
Or if it doesn't like support their claim.
Doesn't support our claim, that's right. I've got this in my head that if I do this, it's going to follow this relationship. And it seems to be following that relationship except here, 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 and here. So I'm just going to ignore here, 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 and here. Look at that. Perfect straight line, right? As you can see kind of here in the data. Where here might you say is an outlier?
That fourth one.
Right here? What about this one?
Can it?
It
Yeah.
could be.
I mean,
If I look at that, that might look like a line, and that might look like... So how do I go about determining whether or not I can throw out a data point ethically? What do I have to do? Can I throw out a data point ethically? You sure? I can. Scientists can throw out data points if we do something to them. What do we have to do to them?
Retest?
We can retest, we can do duplicates, we can do triplicates, we can do statistical analysis. There are statistics out there that can tell us whether or not it is likely to be an outlier. What I can't do is I can't lie in my notebook. I got to be honest about what I'm doing, right? But let's say you're in Gen Chem lab and you're walking over to do your titration and you know that you accidentally spilled something in the flask, and you go and you drink. Can you discard that? Of course you can. You know you messed that up, right? You know that you messed that up and you need to redo it, right? So, yeah, discarding a data point is something that each and every one of you are going to come to. And so when you all get to that point in the class and you say, man, that looks like a really nice relationship if it just wasn't for that point, you're going to be tempted to just throw it out. But just stop and think about the data point. Did you do anything wrong? Do you have anything documented? Can you do a statistical analysis to see whether or not it's valid? You can discard some data points. But how many data points can we discard?
The least amount?
The least amount, right. It's you have to make an argument. You have to be honest about what you're doing. It may well be that you know you messed up an entire series and you need to throw that whole series out. As long as you can justify it, you're justified and ethical in doing so. But if it's just, well, this part seems to favor my idea of where things are and this doesn't, I'm just going to throw that stuff that I don't agree with out. That would be completely incorrect, right? What about writing a scientific article or a report? What about that area? How many of you in here have actually read a real scientific article before? Okay, a few of you. They are not written purely in black and white with a bunch of facts and no emotion, right? There is a myth out there between the humanities folks and the scientists that the scientists are all about hard, cold facts and we don't get our emotions involved in anything. That's nonsense. We're human. We belong to this thing called humanity, the human race, right? We have passions, we have projects, we have things that we want to see be successful. right? And so we tend to express that in our writing. It comes out. But what are some ethical things that could happen?
Like if you're doing research on something and you're also looking at other people's research on the same thing, and if you don't like cite it or mention their name, that's kind of unethical.
Okay. There is no such thing as independent research. You will hear that from some of your professors, and that's not really what they mean. There is no such thing as doing research in a bubble. You're going to go and you're going to go look in literature. You're going to have conversations with colleagues. You're going to go to conferences, whatever the case may be. You don't function in a bubble, right? You're going to do this with the help of other people, either directly or indirectly. So you want to make sure that you cite people's work. You want to make sure that you cite people who have helped you with the project. How do we cite people who have helped us with a project?
By mention.
You can mention, there's a couple of ways in the scientific paper. There's a thing at the top that's got the title of the paper, and then below it is what?
Preface.
The authors. Yeah, so the authors are down there, right? And so if you come to my lab and we work together on this project, you should be an author. You helped gather the data, you helped analyze the data, you helped move it forward, right? So there's authorship. But then there's another way to communicate that. So usually at the end of the paper, there's this thing called acknowledgments. And so we need to acknowledge people that might have helped us, but really didn't do the project. Do you think there's any ethical dilemma there? Should I make you an author or should I make you an acknowledgement? There definitely is a lot of ethical issues there. In fact, there's more fights in academia about the order of authorship and who's in the acknowledgments than anything else. I literally had my first publication that I published here when I was an assistant professor, nearly 2 graduate students get into a fist fight over who was going to be number 1. Somebody has to be first. How do you think I resolved that?
Alphabetical.
Huh?
Alphabetical.
Alphabetical?
Coin toss.
Huh?
Coin toss.
Coin toss? You're not far from the truth. I had 2 students that did equal amounts of work and somebody had to be listed first. We really did just do a coin toss. You know, did I write both of them equally good letters of recommendation? Yeah, I did. You know, but when you both do equal amounts of work and somebody still has to be listed first, somebody's gonna be listed first. Right, so we did it, we just played the roulette with them, flipped the coin, right? And that's how that went. What do you think would maybe merit an acknowledgement versus being an author?
How much work, whether you work indirectly or directly on the project.
Okay, that's not a bad thought. Anybody else?
How much work you have put into that? How much time and effort you have put into that work?
Okay. Not bad.
Being an author of a source that was used. Like if you were doing some research, something on research, and you used a certain source, putting the person who wrote that source in the acknowledgments.
Okay. Anything else?
If they gave you like an idea of like you were talking and they helped you through your thought process, but they didn't really contribute what you were, it would be still good to mention them because they helped you like with the idea or something.
Okay. Yep.
Funding?
Funding?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you mean funding?
I'm not really sure. I was gonna ask you. Like, can money like play a part in being acknowledged?
Money can play a role. So the funding agency, my work is funded through the National Science Foundation or the National Institutes of Health. They are always acknowledged. That we acknowledge the American people for funding our work, essentially through the funding agency. Because none of the American people, except for the ones working on the project, came and helped me with my project. They gave me the funding, right? So they get an acknowledgement. The way that we typically do this in chemistry, in the chemical sciences, is we say something along the lines of, if you have responsibility for the outcomes of the work, you're an author. If you were in a support role that helped with the project, you're an acknowledgement. So as an example, my wife is our instrument manager in chemistry. People will acknowledge her for helping her set up an NMR experiment or making sure that the instrument worked. But she didn't go in and run the experiment. She didn't go in and analyze any of the data. But they couldn't get the data that they needed if she hadn't done her job. So they'll acknowledge that. But if she actually ran the experiments for them and actually analyzed the data and gave them the data and the conclusion, she has responsibility for that work. She would then be an author on that paper. And so there's times when she's an author on a paper, there's times when she's an acknowledgement on the paper. Okay? And so that's usually what we do in terms of authorship in our area. Is there a question? Okay. Yes?
Like, okay, because when my dad was getting his PhD, you know, there's always like I don't want to say supervisor, but there's always someone like above.
Principal investigator.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, a lot of times, would they be considered like an author, or like, would they be considered a technology?
So also in chemistry, and this is a controversial area, the PI is almost always an author because they wrote the grant. They assembled the science that got the funding to do the work. Okay, so they took their expertise, they thought about the problem, they devised a set of initial experiments that then funded the work. So they typically get authorship on everything. Now, where they're in that order in the authorship sometimes comes into play. But yeah, your principal investigators in chemistry are typically considered co-authors. Conflict of interest and conflict of commitment. What is a conflict of interest?
Two people want to do different things.
Okay, that can be a conflict of interest. What else?
Why you want to do, where you want to apply the science to.
Okay,
If you have stakes in something,
if you have stakes in something, okay, like what?
perhaps.
Like T-bone steaks? What kind of steaks are you talking about?
Well, like maybe you put money into it, or it could, the thing that you're researching could directly affect you. So like if you have some, or your family member, so maybe you're doing research on something that could cure a disease and that you or a family member has that disease, you would have a personal conflict of interest.
So are conflicts of interest illegal? They are not, but they are unethical, right? A good example, and this predates you all, this certainly dates me. Big Tobacco, as we used to call it, funded a lot of cancer research. Is that a conflict of interest? Yes. They funded it, and they had direct control over how it was published. That is a conflict of interest. Oh, if you smoke my cigarettes, you're going to get cancer. You can't publish that because I'm the funder of this, and I'm telling you you can't publish it. Is that good for society? Is that ethical? No. How could that be made ethical?
I'd not be funding by Big Tobacco if it was had funds from something else.
Okay, but let's suppose Big Tobacco wanted to put the money into this work and they wanted to do it ethically. Can it be done?
Yes.
Absolutely, it can be done. You have to do it through something like a blind trust. In other words, I'm going to give the money to this blind trust. The blind trust is going to decide who does the work. I have no control over that. And in the agreement, I say, regardless of what the outcome of the results are, you have free reign to publish. That's not illegal. That's not unethical. It may go against their interests, and they probably are unlikely to do it, but there are ways to where you can make things that are a conflict of interest not be a conflict of interest. Okay? There are ways that you can do that. So yeah, that's a perfect example of a conflict of interest. What would be a conflict of commitment?
How much time or money you're going to spend on like researching something?
Okay. In your own lives, have you all ever faced a conflict of commitment?
Yeah.
When?
Choosing between whether
Tuesday between what?
Choosing between whether to.
Oh,
go-
choosing between, I think you gave me an exact day. Okay.
Choosing between whether to go to an event or maybe something academic.
Okay. So is a conflict of commitment an ethical thing? Maybe, right? I mean, you can have a conflict of commitment that you promised one friend that you'd go to this, and you promised another friend that you'd do that at the same time, and you can't be in two places at once. That's just being a jerk, right? You didn't really commit any ethical issue, right? You just can't be in two places at once. You forgot, right, that you promised to somebody and you chose to do another. You're just kind of being a jerk. That's how your other friend would think about it, right? I wouldn't say you'd be unethical, right? But what would be unethical in terms of a conflict of commitment?
Saying you were gonna do a trial or some sort of research and then not doing it, just taking the money and running, essentially.
Do you think it's ever that clear?
I don't necessarily think so. People might start to do an experiment, but maybe they're not necessarily researching it in the way that it should be.
I think conflict of commitment for me becomes, is one of those, to me, it's a gray area. Do I have the time to do it? Yes. But is there more than that? There's the time to do it well.
Yeah, it's kind of like your position about like accepting that offer or not, because like what you said, you didn't feel ready,
Yeah.
you didn't feel prepared, and like you said, you didn't have that time, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't take that either.
Okay. Where might you all run into some conflicts of commitment in terms of your work here as a student?
Sometimes I have to sacrifice other classes so I can focus on maybe one.
Is or are scheduling hoops conflicts of commitment? In other words, you're sacrificing today maybe a little bit of time on this class so that you can study for the exam that's coming up, but you're gonna make it up somewhere else. Is that a conflict of commitment? I think it's okay to move things around on our calendar to fit our needs, right? But I think what we're getting at here is that, you can overcommit in a way that you're not productive across the board and in anything, no matter how you juggle things, right? So you can juggle things, I think, a little bit. But having a conflict, everybody's going to face conflicts of commitment. And some of them are going to be pretty minor. I would argue what you just described would be fairly minor because you can move that around. But if you took on a leadership role in your fraternity or sorority, and you know that it's going to require, let's say, 10 hours a week, 12 hours a week, whatever, to do that, and oh yeah, by the way, you signed up for 19 hours of classes, do you have a conflict of commitment potentially? Probably do, right? And so what are you going to sacrifice? Well, I know historically what students have typically chosen to sacrifice is their class time, right? To do this other thing over in Greek life. That's what students typically choose. Why is that, you think? We don't have to answer that here. But that's typically the way that it goes, right? But it's a conflict of commitment between your extracurriculars and your curriculars, if you will, right? You're going to face these types of conflicts of commitment, okay? The fifth one, use of confidential information. How might that be a conflict or an ethical dilemma?
All I can think about is like government hiding things because they may feel like a security risk or a national risk.
Yeah. Not all things that are confidential are high security, right? The nice thing about being an organic chemist like myself, I don't work with living subjects in terms of I work with people in my research, but I don't do my research on them, right? So I usually don't face this type of dilemma. But there are areas in academia where you will face that kind of dilemma. Where might you face that kind of dilemma?
Making an atomic bomb.
Making an atomic bomb, okay. What else?
Doctors.
Doctors, lawyers, right? You're going to be given all kinds of confidential information, right? And you have to use that ethically and responsibly, right? You all may have a project in a class where you have to give a survey, right? Is survey data confidential?
Depends on the question.
Depends on the questions, right? Does it depend just on the question, or does it depend on the intent? Yeah, both, right? Right? I'm asking you what kind of pizza you like is different than asking you about your medical history. Right? You know, standing in front of the fresh saying, which pizza do you prefer today, the cheese or the pepperoni? Well, you might say, I don't want people to know that I really eat pepperoni because I'm kind of a health freak, but I like my pepperoni pizza every day. You know, well, okay, you want that to be confidential. But that's different than, can you tell me about, you know, treatments or whatever that you might have been going through? It's very different, right? And so we have to have safeguards in place to keep all of this stuff ethical. Does anybody know how we deal with such things at an institution? Do we just let faculty and students go off and do research on human subjects without any checks or balances?
Don't you sign something?
Right? We sign a lot of things. And just signing something, does that mean all of a sudden we're going to be ethical? No, not really. I mean, I sign a lot of things, right? And doesn't mean I'm going to be ethical just because I signed something. We actually have review boards. We have what's called an institutional review board. So if you all are ever going to be involved, let's say you're in a biochemistry class doing research, or a biochemistry lab doing research, and they want to do research on human blood or human samples. That research actually has to go through the institutional review board to make sure that we're getting that material in an ethical manner, that we're protecting the patient's confidentiality, that we understand that the students who are going to be working with us know that they got to wear gloves, and that there's potential for pathogens, and there's all kinds of things that have to be reviewed. We can't just go out and say, you know what, I'm going to go out and do a study on student blood after Friday night, see how much alcohol's in there, you know? We can't just go do that, right? Because there are human subjects involved. All right. Last 10 minutes. I'm going to hand back out your semester by semester guides. You all have until next Wednesday to redo them and turn them back in for 60% of your missed credit. Okay? So if you missed 10 points, you can get 6 points back. Okay? That's what 60% is. And so I highly recommend that you do this. I've already been in communication with your advisor. Many of you saw that email that I sent to Taylor, notifying her that students would be coming to their advisement with these things. You want to go to your advisement with the best possible product. So the reason I'm giving you this opportunity is not just to improve your grade, but to improve the product. Okay, so I've made comments on your handouts. You know what the grades are from your in Canvas. Your grade is listed. Just look up the personalized semester by semester guide. When you do this, you'll need to re-download the template, fix all of your errors. I did not list every error. So if I said there's prerequisite issues, that does not mean only on one class. It means you need to go through and look and make sure that you've got all of your prerequisites taken care of. If I said there are template issues and you look on the first page, you might go, no, there's nothing wrong with this template. It may be on the other page where you maybe had a piece that went over a page or whatever, right? So you need to think about those types of things. Look at it critically. You can do that. So what you will do is you will redo it. You will print it out. You will bring it hard copy, okay, next Wednesday. And you will bring with it your copy that I'm going to hand back out to you today. Okay, so you'll put both of them in, you'll turn it in. And basically what I will do is I will set up another column in Canvas that will be worth 0 credit so that it doesn't add to the total of the class. And then I'll put in, so let's say you did everything right, and let's just say, you know, you missed 10 points, then I'll put 6 in there, and it'll throw the 6 in, it'll look like bonus points, so it'll help you grade. Are there any questions about any of that? Okay, I want you all to have a great product when you go to your advisor. So I will say your name, and I just raise your hand, and we'll get this to you, and you all can free to leave after I hand it back. Morgan McDougal. Kinsey. Hudley. That's you. DeAnthony. I'm going to get my steps in today. William McLean. Mackenzie Walker. That would be the other one. Reese. Kayla. Shruti. She's up front. Shruti Shohan. That's you. Brett. Brett Greenwald. Marika.
Yeah.
Aisha. Leonard.
Sorry, boss.
Celine. Christopher Neal. Sandeep. Taylor Stewart. Mallory. Taylor.
Thank you.
Audrey. Anisha Shelton. Shelton.
She just left.
She left. Sylvia. Macy.
You gave her a paper though, so maybe she got the wrong one.
Oh, that could be. Benjamin. Brett and Anisha Shelton. That's all I have.
You have to call her.
Yeah, you got it.
I can call her.
I think I gave the other person yours. I'm sorry about that.
Yes, ma'am.